paraplegic millionaire. He was humiliated by his fiancée on the street. Only the cleaner and her daughter lifted him from the ground. The wheelchair rolled itself over the curb and stopped in the gutter. Italo Albuquerque lay on Queen Street West in Toronto, looking up at the pale September sky as people walked by, stepping around the wheelchair's tires as if he were a construction cone. Veronica was already on the other side of the street. She hadn't looked back once. 33 years old, his own construction company, a penthouse in Yorkville, and he was lying on the cold asphalt of a Thursday morning, unable to get up by himself. Before continuing this story, comment below which city you're watching from, leave a like, and share with someone who needs to hear this today. Subscribe to the channel too, because this story goes all the way to the end, and you'll want to see every second. What exactly had happened there? He knew. He had known since the car hit the guardrail on Highway 401, since the 7-hour surgery, since the day the doctor said, incomplete spinal cord injury. With that voice of someone who had repeated it so many times, the phrase had lost all its weight. But knowing didn't make the asphalt softer, didn't make people's gazes less fleeting. That look of avoidance, of I don't want to get involved, of this has nothing to do with me. Veronica Saldana had said it there on the sidewalk in front of the Madeleine Café, where they had their first coffee together after his hospital discharge. Italo, you're not the man I fell in love with anymore, you know that. She said it, with that calm voice she used when she was absolutely sure of herself. That voice he had once found sophisticated. She took off the ring, placed it on the edge of the marble table, and left. Her Italian leather bag hitting her hip, her thin heels clicking on the stone floor, without a second's hesitation. He stared at the ring for 3 full minutes. Then he tried to get up from the chair to pick up the ring. He forgot for a second that the chair was him now. And there he was, on the ground. The waiter saw. 2 women saw. A man in a suit veered around him without breaking stride. The asphalt smelled of diesel and old rain. A broom stopped beside his head. A broom with a worn yellow handle, its bristles bent from so much use. And behind the broom was a hand. The hand gripped his arm without asking permission, without hesitation, without that air of someone doing a huge favor. "Are you going to help me, or just stare?" the voice said. Italo turned his face. A woman in a navy blue uniform, hair tied back with a purple elastic, looked at him with an expression that wasn't pity. It was pure pragmatism, like someone looking at a fallen box on the floor and thinking, "This box needs to be lifted, so I'll lift it." He began. "Put your hand on my shoulder, this side here." She bent down firmly, and he put his hand on her shoulder. She smelled of cleaning products and something else underneath. Talcum powder maybe, or coconut soap. No expensive perfume, no imported scents. She was solid, a shoulder hardened from carrying buckets. She lifted him with much more ease than anyone would expect. Italo was back in his chair, straightened his dress shirt, looked at her. She had already returned to her broom. "Thank you," he said. She didn't answer, just swept. A child, about 7 years old, appeared out of nowhere from behind a planter on the sidewalk of the neighboring building where the woman was sweeping. Hair in 2 crooked braids, blue school uniform, backpack almost her size. "Mommy, my snack is finished." "I know, Bia, wait a bit." Italo looked at the girl. The girl looked at him with that child's frankness that hasn't yet learned that staring is rude. "Why are you in the chair?" Bia asked. "Bia!" Her mother raised her voice slightly. "I had an accident," Italo said. The girl considered this for a second. "My dad had an accident too," she said, with the same naturalness with which she might comment on the weather. Then she slung her backpack over her shoulders and went into the building. The woman stopped sweeping for an instant, just an instant, then continued. Italo stared at the closed door of the building the girl had entered. Veronica's ring was still on the marble table inside the cafe. He didn't go back for it. What was the woman's name? He hadn't asked. The building was called the Maplewood Residences and was on the same block as the Solaris Tower where Italo lived. He had no idea how many people lived on that block. He had never noticed the building, never noticed the sidewalk, never noticed the woman in the blue uniform who swept that sidewalk every morning at 8:40. That afternoon, from the window of his penthouse, he looked down at the street. He didn't find her. Why was he looking? The Solaris Tower had 22 floors, a gym on the 18th, a spa on the 19th, and a view of High Park that realtors called exclusive. Italo had bought the apartment at 28 when Albuquerque Holdings was just him and 2 engineers in a rented office in the Civic Center. Now, the company had 240 employees, projects in 4 provinces, and a CFO named Henrique Vasquez, who handled everything with such quiet competence that Italo sometimes forgot he existed. Henrique was 38, his hair always neatly parted to the side, well-cut suits, and a specific quality in his gaze, a quality of calculating constantly. Italo had noticed it, but never paid attention. Competent people calculate. It's part of the job. What he hadn't noticed was that Henrique and Veronica had known each other before, long before. Italo's physiotherapist was Dr. Fernanda Queiroz, who came to the apartment 3 times a week, during the second session after the street incident, as she worked on the mobility of his left hip, which stubbornly refused to cooperate. Italo asked without planning, "Do you know the Maplewood residences around the corner?" Dr. Fernanda didn't look up. "I know it by sight." "Why?" "There's a woman who works there, a cleaner or caretaker, I don't know. Navy blue uniform. Do you want the building's contact info?" Italo didn't answer. The question hung in the air. Why did he want to know? What exactly was he looking for in that? She had lifted him from the ground. That was it. Only that. Gratitude. A simple thing. He almost believed it himself. Her name was Conceição Tavares. He found out 3 days later when the Maplewood residence's superintendent answered the intercom, and Italo asked directly, as he asked anything in business, without circumlocution, without apology, like someone with a natural right to know. The superintendent, a middle-aged man named Mr. Henderson, seemed suspicious for a second. "Why do you want to know, sir? She helped me last week, and I want to thank her properly." Mr. Henderson gave the name, just the name, nothing more. Conceição Tavares. The name was nothing special, a common name, one that carried generations of similar women, hard-working, invisible, indispensable. But he kept repeating it mentally, while Henrique presented the quarterly report via video call, while the physiotherapist bent his left knee, while the silence of the penthouse, at 11 at night, was too vast for a man alone. Conceição Tavares. When was the last time someone had held his arm without asking permission? The next morning, he went downstairs. He hadn't planned to. The elevator opened on the ground floor. The doorman, Gary, said, "Good morning, Mr. Albuquerque," with that unnecessary addition of Mr. that people use with those who have money, and Italo went out to the sidewalk. September in Toronto has that deceptive cold. The sun appears, and you think it's warm, but the wind turns the corner and reminds you who's in charge. She was there. Blue uniform, broom, hair tied back with the same purple elastic, or maybe an identical one. He crossed the sidewalk in his chair. The wheels made a specific sound on the irregular stone of Toronto sidewalks, a jolt at each joint, a rhythm he was still learning to anticipate. She heard, looked, recognized, didn't stop sweeping. "Conceição," he said. She stopped now, looked at him with an expression that wasn't surprise. It was caution. "How do you know my name?" I asked the superintendent. She was quiet for a second, gripped the broom handle with both hands. "What do you want, sir?" "I came to say thank you." "No need. I know there isn't. I wanted to." She said nothing. The wind turned the corner. She blinked against it, but didn't look away. "Do you work here every day?" "Monday to Saturday." "What time do you start?" The caution on her face grew sharper. "Why do you want to know, sir?" Good question. Why did he want to know? "Curiosity," he said. And the word sounded false even to himself. She looked at him for another second. That kind of gaze that evaluates, that measures, that doesn't give away the result. Then she returned to her broom. 7 a.m., she said, and said nothing more. Bia appeared at 8:42, coming out of the building with her enormous backpack and 2 braids. She saw Italo on the sidewalk and stopped as if the sidewalk had requested a pause. "You came back?" she said. "I came back." "Why, Bia?" Conceição said, without raising her eyes from the broom. "She always does that when I ask her something she doesn't want to answer," Bia said to Italo, in a tone of someone sharing useful information. "Says my name with that voice. I know that well too." Italo had to suppress something that wasn't exactly a smile, but was close. "Do you live there?" Bia pointed to the Solaris Tower with a short finger. "I do." "Is it pretty up there?" "It is. Mommy says pretty buildings on the outside are usually empty on the inside." "Bia." Conceição now raised her eyes. "Time for school." Bia pondered for an instant whether it was worth insisting, concluded it wasn't, and walked off down the sidewalk with that child's gait that hasn't yet learned to hurry. Italo watched until she turned the corner. Empty on the inside. He looked up at the penthouse window that shone against the pale sky. 22 floors of concrete and glass. 312 square meters of silence. The 7-year-old girl already knew more about him than anyone in his business circle. Albuquerque Holdings had been founded by Italo's father, Benedito Albuquerque, a man from rural Ontario who came to Toronto at 16 with an address book that was useless, but which he kept because it represented the idea that one day he would meet people. It took him 20 years to build the company from scratch and another 10 to turn it into something serious. Italo inherited it at 25, when his father died of a heart attack on a Sunday morning without warning. The company had debts, overdue contracts, and a team that didn't know if they would continue. Italo closed his father's office door, stayed alone for 40 minutes, and when he opened the door, he already had a plan. He never spoke about those 40 minutes. Never. Not to Veronica, who was with him for 3 years and thought she knew everything about him. Not to his best friend, Caio Menzies, who had drunk beer with him since university. Not to the therapist he visited 4 times after the accident and stopped visiting, because therapy required him to stop working during the session, and that seemed an absurd waste of time. 40 minutes. Closed door. The smell of cold tobacco from his father's office. When he thought about it, what did he feel? He no longer knew the name of the thing. Enrique Vasquez requested an in-person meeting the following Thursday. Some contracts require your physical signature, Italo. I prefer to do this personally. The voice on the phone was normal, but there was something in the timing of the request. 2 weeks after the accident, right after doctors confirmed the injury was permanent, it made Italo pause, just pause for a second. Then he said, "Yes, confirmed for 10 a.m., and hung up. What did Enrique know that Italo didn't yet? He didn't pursue the thought. He had learned over the years that some questions are better left unanswered until the right time. On Wednesday before the meeting, Italo went down at 7:40 a.m., too early, but the apartment was unbearable that morning. He had woken at 4 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep, lying in the dark, looking at the ceiling that cost more per square meter than most houses in the entire city. Conceição was still arriving when he left. She turned the corner with her broom over her shoulder and a bucket in her other hand, and when she saw him on the sidewalk, she paused for a second, a very brief second. Then she continued walking. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Albuquerque." Mister. With that precise distancing, like a thin but very well-built wall. He stayed on the sidewalk while she opened the tools cabinet in the hall of the neighboring building. She took out cleaning products, organized the bucket, put on her rubber gloves. A sequence she clearly repeated every day. Each thing in the same place, each gesture identical to the last. There was a precision in it that wasn't automatic. It was fastidious. "Do you live in this building?" he asked. She put on the second glove. "No. I live in Scarborough." Scarborough was on the other side of the city. 40 minutes by bus at least, depending on the time. Every day. Every day. She picked up the bucket. "You wake up early, sir." "I can't sleep much." She looked at him for an instant. Not with pity, not with clinical curiosity, but with recognition, like someone hearing something familiar. "Me neither," she said, and went into the building. Italo stayed on the cold sidewalk. The September wind was already showing who was boss. Up above, in the 312 square meter penthouse, the ceiling was waiting for him. He didn't go up that early. Enrique arrived at the Thursday meeting with a thin folder and an expression Italo knew, the expression of someone who had prepared what he was going to say carefully enough for it to seem natural. They sat in the apartment's meeting room. Italo sent his assistant out. "The contracts," Italo said. Enrique opened the folder. 3 documents. Italo read each one calmly. This was a skill his father had taught him, to read every line of everything before signing anything, even if the other side of the table was impatient. He read, signed 2, but on the 3rd, he stopped. It was a transfer of power of attorney for operational management. Broad, too detailed. "This isn't standard," Italo said. "Given your current state, my current state is that I can't walk, not that I can't read." Italo closed the folder. "This document doesn't leave here without the company lawyer. Schedule it for next week." Enrique didn't lose his composure, smiled slightly, put away the folder. Of course, no problem. But there was something in the pace with which he closed the folder, too quickly, like someone who had anticipated this response and already had the next step calculated. Italo stared at the closed door after Enrique left. When had he stopped paying attention to the people around him? When was the last time he had truly looked at the person in front of him? Bia appeared on the sidewalk on Friday with a drawing in her hand. Italo was there. It was already the 5th consecutive day he had come down too early, and he had stopped looking for excuses for it. Bia went straight to him with that total absence of ceremony children have before they learn to pretend. "I made this for you," she said, and handed him the paper. It was a drawing of a wheelchair with a figure inside. A man, one assumed, given the serious line of the mouth, and beside it, a larger figure with braids and a broom. Above the two figures, in irregular child's letters that were still learning the size of letters, "You are not alone." Italo stared at the paper for a time that was too long for a normal response. "Thank you, Bia. My teacher said drawing is a way of speaking when words don't come out. Bia finds that and you don't seem like difficult words. But I thought it would help you." It helped. Conceição stood at the entrance of the building, watching the scene. She had her gloves in her hand and an expression Italo couldn't name. It wasn't tenderness exactly. It was something more complicated, something she quickly put away before he could read it properly. "Bia, time for school," she said, with more gentleness than usual. Bia left without arguing, as if she knew that at that specific moment, an argument was out of place. Italo carefully folded the drawing and put it in his shirt pocket. Conceição saw the gesture, said nothing, but something in her face changed. Too small to be named, too big to be ignored. He put the drawing in his desk drawer next to his father's photo. Why that spot? He didn't know how to answer. The meeting with the lawyer, Claudio Marins, happened the following Tuesday, and Claudio arrived with a serious expression that was different from a lawyer's usual seriousness. A lawyer's seriousness is professional. Claudio's expression was personal. "Italo, before we get into the document you sent me, I need to show you something." Claudio placed a printout, an email, on the table. "This arrived at my office anonymously last night. I don't know who it came from, but you need to read it." Italo read. It was an email chain between Henrique Vasquez and Veronica Saldaña, dated 6 months before the accident. 6 months, when the two didn't know each other. The content was enough for any judge to understand the situation. A detailed strategy for progressively removing Italo from the company's management, using his mental health after a crisis, Veronica described as inevitable, given his profile as an entry point. The plan included the power of attorney, included the gradual transfer of contracts to a third-party company that had Henrique's name in its corporate structure. It included a line. Italo read twice because he didn't believe it the first time, after he signs. The rest is just waiting. Waiting for what? He didn't ask aloud, but the silence in the room became dense. "How much do you need to build the case?" Italo said. Claudio already had the numbers ready. That afternoon, Italo stayed in his chair by the window for hours. High Park was there, green and indifferent, its paths full of people who knew nothing about him. Couples, dogs, children, life happening at its usual pace, completely oblivious to the fact that he had spent 3 years building a life project with a woman who was simultaneously helping to dismantle everything he had. 3 years. How many conversations, how many dinners, how many trips, how many mornings, all of that had been real to him. For her, what was it? He lingered with that question for a while, then stopped. Not because he had the answer, but because he realized the answer changed nothing. What was done was done. What mattered was what came next. The desk drawer was slightly open. The corner of Bia's drawing peeked out. "You are not alone." He closed the drawer carefully, as if the paper were fragile. The next morning, Italo went down earlier than ever. 6:40 a.m. The sun hadn't quite decided to appear. The street was almost empty, just 1 or 2 cars passing slowly. An old woman with a small dog that barked once at the chair and then seemed embarrassed. Conceição arrived at 7:10 a.m., turned the corner, and stopped when she saw him there in the cold, still dark Toronto morning. "Are you all right, sir?" The usual caution, but with something more. "I am." A pause. "I'm not, but I will be." She looked at him. The silence between them was different from other silences. It wasn't the silence of people who have nothing to say. It was the silence of people who have a lot, but don't yet know how. She went to the cabinet, opened it, took out her things, the usual sequence, but when she went to pick up the bucket, she stopped. "Want some coffee?" she said, without looking at him. Italo didn't answer immediately. She still hadn't looked at him. "I have a thermos in my bag. Black coffee. No sugar. I don't have a cup, just the thermos lid. It's nothing special." "I do," he said. She took out the thermos, opened it, filled the lid, and handed it to him. She held the thermos herself. They drank coffee there, she standing, he in his chair, in the 6:50 a.m. cold, not speaking for a while that was too good to be interrupted. The coffee was strong, bitter, smelled of a family home. "Good coffee, my mother taught me. Says weak coffee is an excuse for people who don't really want to wake up." Italo almost smiled. "Almost. Your mother lives here in Toronto?" "Passed away simply, without drama, 4 years ago. I'm sorry. She was strong, died strong too. Conceição took a sip from her own thermos. My father is still alive, lives in Bari. Bia and I go there once a month. Bia likes to go. Bia likes everything. For the first time, a small, real trace of a smile. She wakes up every morning, thinking it's going to be the best day of her life. Italo lingered on that. How does she do that? I always wanted to know too. The sun finally appeared at that instant, not dramatically, not suddenly, but with that gentle progression of someone arriving little by little, first illuminating the tops of the buildings, and then descending. Conceição put away the thermos. I have to work. I know. Italo held the thermos lid for a second before returning it. Thank you. For the coffee? For everything. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away this time. The lawsuit against Henrique and Veronica proceeded in secret for 4 weeks. Claudio worked with the auditing team specifically hired for this purpose, and what they found was worse than the email suggested. A diversion structure built with surgical patience over almost 2 years, taking advantage of every moment. Italo was traveling, in construction meetings. Every lapse in attention, every trust given without verification. $270,000 diverted to Henrique's shell company. Undervalued contracts with related companies, and a clause in a life insurance policy that named Veronica as the primary beneficiary, altered without Italo's knowledge 3 months before the accident. Italo read every page, every attachment, every footnote. Then he called Claudio. You can proceed. Italo, just to confirm. You want to pursue the criminal route too? No, just civil. Everything, Italo said. Everything the law allows. The mornings on the sidewalk became a ritual neither of them named. Sometimes there was coffee, sometimes there was silence. Sometimes Bia appeared before school and dominated the conversation with questions about everything. About why the chair had those wheels and not others. About whether Italo had a dog. About his favorite color. About whether he had ever seen real snow. One afternoon, while her mother was cleaning the internal hall, Bia stayed with Italo on the sidewalk and taught him a game that involved pebbles and lines drawn on the sidewalk, with a piece of chalk she carried in her backpack, as if it were an essential item. You're terrible at this, she said after the 3rd round. Is it the chair? It's not the chair. It's you. She said it without malice, as an observed fact. But you learn fast when you want to. How do you know? Because you're really trying. Some people pretend when they try. You do it for real. Italo looked at that 7-year-old child with crooked braids and a piece of chalk in her hand. Who had taught her to see people like that? He looked at the building door where Conceição was wiping the glass of the entrance, her back to the street. One October afternoon, while Bia was at school and Conceição had finished early, she was on the sidewalk putting away her materials when Italo came out of the Solaris tower. She looked at him, he looked at her, and there was that specific second of someone realizing they have a choice to make. Can I buy you lunch? He said. She closed the cabinet, turned to him. Why? Because it's 11:30, you're off your shift, and the restaurant around the corner has a soup I heard is good. Who told you? Gary, my doorman. She considered. Gary knows about soup? Apparently Gary knows a lot of things, and I never asked before. She was quiet for a moment, looked at the building, looked at him. There was something in that look. The usual caution, but beneath it something that felt different, like a door that isn't locked, but the person on the other side is still deciding whether to open it. A soup, she said. Just a soup. They went. The soup was a hearty beef and vegetable, and Gary was right. They stayed for 1 hour and 40 minutes. They talked about Barry, about Italo's father's company, about the Scarborough neighborhood in the 90s, about Bia learning to read by herself before starting school because she watched the bus signs from the window. They didn't talk about the accident, didn't talk about Veronica, didn't talk about her husband, but her husband was there in the silence between one sentence and another. Italo felt it. She guarded it with a specific care, not of hidden pain, but of a sacred thing not to be given to just anyone. As they left, on the sidewalk, she said, "Thank you. I was the one who was invited. You paid. It's different." She looked at him for a second, then walked off down the sidewalk, her bag on her shoulder, with the firm step of someone who knows exactly where they're treading. He watched until she turned the corner. What was that? He knew, but he wasn't going to name it yet. Not because he was afraid of the name, but because some things need to grow in the dark before they can bear the light. 2 weeks later, Claudio called at 8 a.m. "Italo, the police are picking up Henrique today. You need to be aware." "I am." Veronica will also be subpoenaed. The insurance policy part significantly complicates her situation. I know. Are you okay? Italo looked out the penthouse window, down below on the sidewalk. He could see, small from that height, but recognizable by the blue uniform, Conceição arriving for work, her broom over her shoulder, her usual steady stride. I'm better than I was, he said. Henrique Vasquez's arrest happened on a Tuesday morning, in front of 2 colleagues and the office secretary, when 2 detectives knocked on the meeting room door where he was presenting a report, as if the world were functioning normally. The secretary later told anyone who would listen that he turned completely white, that the folder he was holding fell to the floor, and no one bent down to pick it up. The news spread through Toronto's real estate market in a day. Veronica called Italo that afternoon. He didn't answer. She sent a message. Italo, I need to explain. He read it, held the phone in his hand for a moment, then deleted the message and blocked the number. There was nothing to explain. The email had explained everything. That night, Italo couldn't sleep again, but it was different. It wasn't the ceiling weighing him down. It was something moving, like the last piece of a complicated mechanism finally clicking into place, and you hear the click. The click wasn't about Henrique, wasn't about Veronica, it was about what came next. What came next? For the first time in months, the question held no fear. Conceição learned of Henrique's arrest from Mr. Henderson, who heard it from the doorman of the Solaris Tower, who heard it from the office secretary, who told her boyfriend who was the doorman's wife's cousin. Toronto is a big city with a tiny interior when it comes to gossip. The next morning, when Italo went downstairs, she was there, but something about her was different. A small tension in her shoulders, a hesitation he hadn't seen before. I heard what happened, he said. I heard that you heard, he said. She didn't smile. She was weighing something. He waited. My husband. She stopped. Restarted. Aldenir. His name was Aldenir Tavares. She said the name, with that care of someone carrying something heavy but not wanting to drop it. He died 3 years ago. In a construction accident. Italo remained quiet. He was a laborer, worked for a contractor that provided services to a large construction company. She looked at him directly. Albuquerque Holdings. The September cold grew colder. Which site? Italo said. His voice came out even. Trained by years of meetings, years of negotiations, years of keeping face when the ground disappeared. The Cedarview Residences, South District. She said the name slowly, as if each syllable cost. Italo knew the Cedarview Residences. Of course he knew. It was one of the first major projects the company had won the bid for after he took over. He was 26, learning to be what his father had been. He trusted the engineers, trusted the site managers, trusted Henrique, who at that time was a contracts manager. Henrique. The case was in the courts for 2 years, Conceição said. The contractor was convicted, the construction company wasn't. She took a deep breath. I received compensation. It wasn't enough, but I needed money for Bia, and I signed. She looked at her hands. I signed. Conceição, I'm not accusing you. She raised her eyes. In them were things she had carried alone for 3 years. Pain, anger, exhaustion, and, underneath it all, a dignity that was ashamed of nothing. Italo remained quiet for a long moment. The name of the site manager, who signed the safety report at that time. She frowned. But why? Because if the equipment was out of standard, someone signed the authorization to use it anyway. Italo looked at her. And I want to know who it was. The silence between them was different from all the previous ones. Things a woman keeps when she knows the world might demand proof of everything at any moment. The documents were sufficient. The safety report signed by a third-party engineer named Mauricio Braga. The date. And in the company archives that Claudio unearthed with judicial authorization, an email from Henrique Vasquez to Mauricio Braga, dated 2 weeks before the accident, saying, "Go ahead and clear it. The formal inspection is next week. The work can't stop. Go ahead and clear it. The work can't stop." Aldenir Tavares died on a Friday morning at 10 a.m. when the scaffolding gave way because the locking pin was not the correct standard. The work didn't stop. It resumed the following Monday. Italo held that email in his hand for an hour. It was Henrique. It was always Henrique, the man he had hired young and trusted blindly because he was competent, and because competence, he now discovered, could be used for anything, depending on who possessed it. What kind of man builds a company on the work of other people, without knowing the names of those on the sites? What was the name of the driver who had worked with him for 6 years? What was the name of the doorman of the building where the company's first project was located? When was the last time he had stepped out of an office and onto a construction site to truly look at what was happening? He wasn't guilty of having hired Henrique, but there was a different, more diffuse, and more real guilt. One that had no defined defendant. The guilt of someone who decides from afar, from above, with paper in hand, without seeing the faces of those who execute below. Aldenir Tavares had a face, had a name, had a 4-year-old daughter at the time, and a 29-year-old wife who had since swept sidewalks every day in the cold of Toronto. And he had never known. He asked Claudio to open an additional civil liability lawsuit against Henrique Vasquez for Aldenir Tavares' accident, not as a company representative, but in his own name, personally funding it. This will attract attention, Claudio said. It will look like you're acknowledging institutional guilt. I don't care how it looks, Italo said. I care about what's right. After that, he requested the complete dossier of all construction accidents at Albuquerque Holdings since its founding. All of them. Every occurrence, every report, every compensation paid, every case opened or closed. There were 47 records, over 22 years. 47. He read each one. Conceição learned of the action from her lawyer, a union labor lawyer she had never let go of, keeping the contact in the same notebook where she kept Bia's pediatrician's number. The lawyer called one afternoon and said, Conceição, Albuquerque Holdings has opened an action to revise the compensation agreement you signed. They want to increase the amount. She held the phone in her hand, sitting on the small bed in her Scarborough apartment, Bia sleeping in the next room. Who asked for this? She said. Italo Albuquerque himself, personally, and he is also going to trial against the former CFO for your husband's accident. She was quiet for a long time. He doesn't have to do this, she said, almost to herself. Apparently, he thinks he does. She hung up, stayed in the dark room, listening to Bia's breathing through the monitor, and felt that thing she had learned not to feel out of respect for her own pain. A small opening, like when a window that has been closed too long finally gives way. She still didn't know what to do with it, but the window was open. The next morning, on the sidewalk, she arrived and he was already there, as always. Now she went to him without preamble. Why did you do that? Because it was the right thing to do. I know I shouldn't, Italo looked directly at her. But the company my father built, that I inherited, that I never truly cleaned from within that company owes, and I am the company. She stood in front of him, the early morning sun to the side, the wind pulling a strand of her hair out of the purple elastic. It won't bring him back. She said it, not with anger, but with the precision of someone who has processed pain until it becomes fact. No, it won't. Italo didn't look away, but his name will be spoken in court. The circumstances of the accident will be recorded, and Bia will grow up knowing that her father died because of someone's failure, not by chance, and that someone answered for it. Conceição took a deep breath, a breath that was work. Why do you care what Bia will know? The question hung in the air between them. Italo answered with the simplest truth he had. Because she matters to me. You matter to me. The silence that followed was the longest they had shared, longer than all the others combined. Italo, you don't have to do anything with this, he said. I just needed you to know. She looked at him for a time he didn't measure. Then she picked up the broom. I have to work. I know. She left, but when she reached the building door, she stopped without turning around. The coffee's in my bag, if you want it. He wanted it. Henrique Vasquez's trial for the death of Aldenir Tavares happened in November. Italo was present in his wheelchair, in the front row, beside Claudio. Conceição was on the other side of the room, with the union lawyer. They didn't look at each other during the proceedings, but there was a mutual awareness of presence that acted as an anchor. Henrique entered in a suit with an expensive lawyer, with that posture of someone who still believes he can manage any situation. But the email was irrefutable, and when the judge read aloud, "Go ahead and clear it. The work can't stop," something crumbled in Henrique's face that never returned to place. Conviction, 4 years and 2 months, plus civil damages. Veronica was separately convicted for attempted fraud in the insurance policy, a suspended sentence, but with a record and a reputation in the market, which for someone who lived by appearances, was the heaviest penalty of all. Leaving the courthouse, in the cold marble corridor, Conceição stopped beside Italo. "Thank you," she said. "The least I could do." She shook her head slightly. "It wasn't the least. You know it wasn't." They stood there in the corridor for a moment, people passing around them. The court's usual rhythm continued. She was in street clothes, a dark blue blouse and black pants. Her hair down for the first time he had seen. She looked different like that. Not better or worse, just herself in a different way. "Can I take you home?" he said. She looked at him. The caution was still there. Caution wouldn't go anywhere overnight, and he understood that. But there was also the open window. "You can," she said. Bia learned the result from her mother's WhatsApp. A simple message. "It worked out, my daughter." And when Conceição arrived home, Bia was sitting at the table doing her homework, with that total concentration of someone who hasn't yet learned to do two things at once. She looked up when her mother entered. "Did Italo come too?" she asked. "He did." Bia went back to her notebook. "He's good for you." She said it with the naturalness with which she would say anything obvious. Conceição stood at the entrance of the small apartment, her bag still on her shoulder. "How do you know?" "Because he looks at you like Grandpa looks at Grandma." Bia made a stroke in her notebook, satisfied with her own conclusion. That look of when someone is afraid to lose. The months that followed were made of small things. Morning coffees on the sidewalk that became a daily custom. Lunches that became weekly. One afternoon, Bia spent in the Solaris Tower apartment while Conceição had an appointment with her lawyer, and during which Bia reorganized Italo's bookshelf by color because it looks prettier that way. And Italo left it as she put it. Physiotherapy progressed not to where he expected, because the expectation of full recovery didn't exist, but to where it was possible. More control, more mobility, less pain. Doctor Fernanda said each week that he was working differently. "You're working like someone who has a reason." Italo hired a new CFO, Berenice Leal, who had come from a major Canadian bank and had a specific quality in her gaze that Italo tested in the first 3 meetings and approved. She disagreed with him when she had reason to disagree. That was worth more than any resume. There was a December afternoon when he passed by the Maplewood Residence's sidewalk, and Mr. Henderson, the superintendent, was outside. "Mr. Albuquerque, Conceição is leaving at the end of the month. She got a position at a public school as a general services assistant. It has stability, better pay." Mr. Henderson said this in a tone that suggested the other person would be sad. Italo was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's wonderful." And it was true. She told him personally a few days later on the sidewalk, a cold December morning with the scent of pine that Toronto has at that time of year, without anyone being able to explain where it comes from. "I know, Mr. Henderson already told you," she said. "He did. I wasn't going to hide it, I know." She crossed her arms over her chest, not defensively, but like someone who is cold. "I like it here, but there it's better for me and for Bia. It will be great. You don't have to pretend you're okay with it." "I'm not pretending." Italo looked at her. "I'm genuinely happy for you. That doesn't cancel out what I feel. They're two things at once." She looked at him. The caution was still there, but the window was more than open. "Now, what do you feel?" she said with a voice that was direct, without being aggressive. A voice that truly wanted to know. Italo took a deep breath. The December cold entered with the air. That Bia was right. That look of someone who's afraid to lose. That's it. Conceição was quiet, looked at the asphalt for a second, then at him. Italo. Her voice had changed, still firm, but with something different underneath. "I'm afraid of many things. I know. I'm afraid of opening up and losing again. I know. I'm afraid Bia will get attached, and then Conceição." He said her name calmly. She stopped. "I'm not asking you not to be afraid. I'm asking you to be afraid and stay anyway." The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was a silence of arrival, like when you travel far and recognize the road home. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Let's take it slow," she said. "Slow?" he said. She didn't smile immediately, but when she did, small, real, the kind that isn't constructed, that simply appears, it was the first complete smile he saw from her. And he understood at that instant why he had come down early every morning for all those months. They took it slow. Slow had their rhythm, coffees that turned into Sunday afternoon strolls in High Park, with Bia running ahead on a borrowed bike, shouting, "Watch out for the root, Italo," every time there was a bump in the path, because she had naturally become the unofficial guide to the wheelchair. Slow had the evening conversations after Bia slept, when Conceição called from the Scarborough apartment, and they talked for hours about things that were never urgent, but always necessary. Slow had the day he first arrived at the Scarborough apartment. A small apartment, clean, with that cleanliness of someone who doesn't have much but takes care of what they have. with a bookshelf of children's books beside a broad-leafed plant, and in the center of the kitchen table, a pink plastic fruit bowl with 3 bananas. Slow had a moment when she saw the apartment through his eyes, seeing it, and didn't apologize. She just said, "It's mine." And there was in "it's mine" a pride that needed no comparison with anything. Slow had the physiotherapy sessions he began to tell her about, not as a medical report, but as a conversation. What had improved, what still hurt, what Dr. Fernanda had said, and what he was trying to believe. She listened, not with pity, but with presence. There was an enormous difference between the two of them, and he had never felt that with anyone else. Slow had the afternoon Bia came home from school with a project about family, and presented her mother with a sheet of paper with the family drawn. Conceição, herself, and a figure in a wheelchair she identified in the caption, written with the help of her teacher, as Italo, my friend, who became family. Conceição folded the paper and kept it with her marriage certificate. In early March of the following year, Italo asked to talk with Conceição, without Bia, without haste, on a Saturday afternoon, after she finished her new job at the public school, where she had been for 2 months, and where the children already called her Auntie C, with that naturalness of adopting good people at the first opportunity. They went to the beef and vegetable soup restaurant. "Our place," Bia said when she found out, without any instruction to call it that, as if she knew things adults hadn't yet decided. They sat, ordered. The waiter was new, didn't know them. After the soup arrived, Italo placed a small box on the table. Conceição looked at the box, looked at him. "Italo, let me speak first." She closed her mouth. "I spent most of my life," he said, "building things with my eyes on numbers and not on people. I built buildings without knowing the names of those who worked on them. I built relationships without truly seeing who was beside me. And when everything collapsed at once, the company, the fiancé, my legs, I was on a sidewalk, thinking I had lost everything." Conceição didn't look away. "But I hadn't lost. I had lost the wrong things and found the right thing." He looked at her. "You didn't save me because you wanted to be a hero. You lifted me because it was what needed to be done. And then you continued being exactly who you are, without asking permission, without shrinking, without pretending to be less than you are to make me seem more. I had never known a person like that." She had her hands around the soup bowl, the hands he knew now, the marks from cleaning products that didn't completely disappear, the wedding band she still wore on her right ring finger, a silent testament to a love that had become memory, but not abandonment. "I know Aldenir will always be with you," he said. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let 2 loves fit into the same life." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, white gold, a small stone, nothing that screamed, everything that endured. "I want to build from scratch with you, with Bia, slowly, if necessary, at whatever speed is good for you." The restaurant continued with its usual noise, forks, conversations, traffic outside, life indifferent and constant. Conceição looked at the ring. A tear fell, just a quick one she didn't wipe away. "You're stubborn," she said with a voice that wasn't completely steady. "I am. It will be difficult sometimes. I know. I have opinions about everything. I know. I like that." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she placed her hand over his, her hands with cleaning product marks over the hands that had once signed contracts without reading them to the end. "Slowly," she said. "Slowly," he said. She took the ring from the box and put it on herself, without ceremony, with that gesture of a woman who does things with her own hands, because it had always been that way, and would continue to be. Then she lifted her soup bowl. "It's going to get cold." He smiled. The first true smile in a long time. He also picked up his spoon. Bia found out that same night when they got home. Conceição knelt in front of her, in Scarborough, with the ring on her finger, and said, "Mommy's going to marry Italo again. Do you know what that means?" Bia considered the question with that seriousness of someone who takes adult questions seriously. "Does it mean we're going to live together one day? Does it mean he's my stepfather? If you want to." Bia thought for another second. "Then can I call him Dad one day? If I want to?" Conceição's eyes filled. "Yes. Then it's okay." Bia picked up her homework notebook. "I already knew it would work out." Conceição laughed. That kind of laugh that comes with tears, that has no single name in English, but everyone knows. "How did you know?" Bia didn't look up from her notebook. "Because good people find good people." Grandma used to say that. The grandma who smelled of talcum powder and made strong coffee and said weak coffee was an excuse for people who didn't really want to wake up. Conceição put her hand on her daughter's hair. Stayed that way for a moment. She was right. 2 years later. The wedding was simple, as she wanted, as he agreed, without hesitation. 17 guests, the downtown registry office, which had an internal garden, where she said, "I do," with the firmest voice Italo had ever heard from anyone. Bia was the flower girl and wore a blue dress she chose herself that matched absolutely nothing her mother was wearing, and she was so proud of the dress that it didn't matter. Her grandfather from Bari was there, a white-haired man who shook Italo's hand with a strength that wasn't a threat. It was an assessment. And then he simply said, "Take good care of her." "I will," Italo said. The old man nodded. "Enough. Albuquerque Holdings created an internal occupational safety department with its own budget and independent quarterly audits." Italo personally visited sites in his wheelchair, with engineers who, at first, didn't know what to do with it, and then learned that the owner on site meant the owner cared. Accidents fell 53% in the first year. Conceição continued at the public school, where the children still called her Auntie C, and where she organized a reading project for students with difficulties, which started with 6 children and reached 42 inches one semester. The principal said she should study pedagogy. She was thinking about it. Bia was 9 years old and reading at a 1-2-year-old level because that's how it had always been, and she had a firm opinion about basically everything and used the sketch pad Italo gave her for her birthday to draw characters from stories she invented and which were, according to her literature teacher, surprisingly well structured for her age. "I know how to tell stories because I learned that every story has to have a why," Bia said, when the teacher told her mother that. One autumn afternoon, Italo was on the balcony of the Yorkville apartment, which was now their apartment. Redecorated with the bookshelf, Bia had reorganized again, this time by subject, not by color, because by color was for when I was a kid. Reading a site report that needed approval, Conceição entered with 2 coffee cups, real cups, no longer the thermos lid, and placed one beside him. "North District site," she said, looking at the report. "North District. The safety engineer went there this week." "He did. Clean report." She sat beside him, drank her coffee, looked at the High Park view he had bought for himself years ago as a symbol of arrival, and which was now simply the view they had from the balcony. "Italo. Conceição, are you happy?" He lowered the report, looked at her, her hair, which now sometimes was loose, the purple elastic still kept in some drawer because she said it was comfortable. The face he knew now in all lights, in all moods, in all silences. "I am," he said. "Are you?" She thought for a second, not because she doubted, but because she was one of those people who don't answer without thinking. "I am," she said and drank her coffee. Down below, in the park, Bia ran on her new bike, which was finally hers, not borrowed from anyone. The wheels spun fast on the asphalt path, the wind in her braids, still crooked, still with her mother's purple elastic, by her own insistence, and she shouted something to a friend that couldn't be heard from that height. She shouted and laughed, and the laughter floated up. Sometimes love doesn't appear when you're ready. It appears when you're on the ground, on the cold asphalt of a Thursday, unable to get up by yourself. And the right person doesn't offer you a hand because you deserve it. They offer it because it's what needs to be done. The rest you build slowly, with the right hands, at the right pace, and it lasts. This story has come to an end, but your opinion is what keeps it alive. Comment below which city you're watching from and what you thought of Italo and Conceição's journey. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and send this video to someone who needs to believe that new beginnings are possible. We'll see you in the next story.